headliner, Newt Gingrich, former House Speaker and Fox News contributor. Mr. Speaker, great to have you as our headliner this morning. Welcome back. Well, what did you think of the president last night?
Look, I think he is extraordinarily excited. He's watching his policies work. And I think that's something that's very hard for the Washington establishment to come to grips with. Excuse me. The fact is, he saw job numbers this morning, dramatically better than projected. We now have the lowest black unemployment in American history, which is a very positive thing. I mean, it's sad that liberals can't relax and say, you know, having fewer and fewer people out of work is a good thing. The question that I think is fascinating is, if President Trump is right, and so far he's had a pretty good run at this economy is going to get bigger and stronger going on out for another 4 or 5, 6 years. If that happens, the impact on politics in America will be tremendous, because you'll have this huge contrast between food stamps and unemployment under Obama and better jobs, higher take-home pay, greater opportunities under Trump. And at some point, the gap will be so wide that among Asian Americans and Latino Americans and African Americans, you're going to see fairly substantial drift away from a Democratic Party which has failed them. So I think what you saw last night was a president who's enthusiastic, who believes his policies are working. And let me make one last point, because this is a major fight we're going to have in the country. The Chinese, since 1991, have routinely and consistently cheated. They grew as fast as they did. The estimate by the Obama Director of National Intelligence was they were stealing $460 billion a year in intellectual property. Trump has decided he's going to stop it. Now, the Chinese don't want to stop. It's been working just fine for them. But this is going to be a real fight, and we need to understand that. And I think the people who are against the Trump policies need to explain why they favor allowing the Chinese to steal.
Listen, you said a lot. I hope we can get to all of it. I think we're just going to be able to chip away a little bit at that whole answer there. I thought this rally last night for him was a home run. The place was going nuts. I can't recall a time during President Bush's first term, almost 2 years in, where he could have a rally like this, or even President Obama 2 years in. President Obama lost 63 seats in the midterm election in 2010. He's hitting on all these points. I thought immigration was the biggest applause line of the night. He kept coming back to it over and over again. He loves to poke the Democrats in the eye. I mean, here's a really good example. Soundbite number 2 on Brett Kavanaugh and the obstruction that the president alleges. Watch.
So far, the Democrats haven't given us any votes, and that's because they will do anything they can to not help the Trump agenda. Brett Kavanaugh, highest education, best grades, best tests, best everything. They thought 15 years ago he was going to be a Supreme Court judge. Look at Justice Gorsuch. How good is he? Not allowing these great people to serve their country. It's a disgrace.
So that's on Kavanaugh, and also on the Ron DeSantis thing. Ron DeSantis wants to be a Republican governor in Florida. He made an ad this week where he has his child. He's talking about Make America Great Again, and I'm teaching my kids the words how to build the wall. And in return for that ad, he gets the president to do a rally in Florida and mention his name 10 or 15 times. And just what's the political transaction at work here? Where the president says, if you get on board with my message, I will get on board with you and I will help lead you to victory. What is happening now within the party in this relationship back and forth?
Well, I mean, look, it's totally fascinating. I've written 2 books about it because it is so fascinating. You have in President Trump a very strong personality who has a very definite view of the world. It turns out that at least among Republicans, his activities are wildly popular. I think 88% of the Republicans approve of him, which is a higher number, except for the period right after 9/11, a higher number than any president in modern times has had in their own party's approval. So when he goes in and says, I like Ron DeSantis, Ron jumps 16 points in a week. When he went into Georgia for Brian Kemp, Kemp won the primary pulling away. Now, the test will be this fall, transferring that into winning the general election seats. But I think Washington is so anti-Trump, and the liberal media is so anti-Trump, they don't understand what's happening out there. Let me just give you one example. Sanctuary cities, 84% of the American people believe sanctuary cities increase crime. 84%. Now, every Democrat in the Senate co-sponsored Senator Feinstein's open border bill. There's no state in the country where more than 20% of the people favor open borders. So the Democrats are talking themselves out on these radical left agendas, which in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and CBS News all sounds terrific. But I think when you get down to September and October, we're going to discover that there's a red wave, not a blue wave, and that people are going to repudiate the kind of radical extremism that we're seeing emerge in the Democratic Party.
And of course, the big question will be, where is the Mueller investigation at that point? And what is possibly a big test of the Robert Mueller probe is day 2 now we are in of the trial for Paul Manafort, the president's former campaign manager. The president, Mr. Speaker, just tweeted this out. Paul Manafort worked for Ronald Reagan, Bob Dole, and many other highly prominent and respected political leaders. He worked for me for a very short time. Why didn't government tell me that he was under investigation? These old charges have nothing to do with collusion. A hoax. The president just tweeted that a few minutes ago, Mr. Speaker.
Look, I think the president has every right to be deeply, deeply frustrated at the failure of his attorney general to exercise leadership. I also note that in the Wall Street Journal this morning, you had a former special agent of the FBI wrote a devastating piece where he suggests pretty directly that Brennan, who was the head of the CIA and is a radical leftist who voted for the Communist Party back in the 70s, Brennan may have actually used the CIA to help set up the FBI to start the whole investigation based on a series of things which we now know increasingly are false. So imagine you're the president. You're looking out here and you're saying, let me get this straight. The FBI lied to the FISA court judge. The CIA may have deliberately set up the FBI. And I got an attorney general who doesn't have the toughness needed to start cleaning out the snake pit. And by the way, notice what the trial's about. They're not going after Manafort for collusion with Russia. They're going after Manafort on things like taxes. This is exactly what independent counsels do. They can't solve the case they were hired for, so they invent a case. And I'll tell you, if Manafort wins this, and there's a good chance he will, I think Mueller is going to look like a fool. And I think the whole country is going to shrug off everything else that Mueller does at that time.
Let's see if that's the case. He's got another trial right after that, too. You know, win, lose, or draw right now in Virginia. He goes to the D.C. court. You mentioned Jeff Sessions. Here's another tweet from 40 minutes ago. This is a terrible situation. And Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now before it continues to stain our country any further. Bob Mueller is totally conflicted, and his 17 angry Democrats that are doing his dirty work are a disgrace to the USA. What authority does what authority right now does Jeff Sessions have if he were so inclined to clean house? Could Sessions end it today?
He's the attorney general.
But if the president and the president could fire Jeff Sessions, and he's not going to.
Right.
Well, if he's this upset,
because
why not?
He's not going to fire Jeff Sessions because the fix is in Washington, and he would not be able to get anybody approved. The Senate would go crazy. About a third of the Republicans would go crazy, and you'd be back in a kind of Watergate-like environment. So I think President Trump's far better off to endure this, publicly be angry, but endure it. But on the other hand, if Jeff Sessions wanted to, as Attorney General, he has absolute authority to fire the entire Mueller team. And I originally tweeted that I thought Mueller was a very respectable guy. And then I watched him hire these 17 lawyers that Trump is talking about. This is a disgraceful, one-sided witch hunt by a bunch of left-wing Democrats. And it's compounded because we have learned since then about Comey. We've learned since then about the number 2 guy at the FBI. We've learned since then about Strzok. Every time we turn around, we learn more things that indicate that the sickness in the Justice Department and the senior levels of the FBI was very real, and I think should scare everybody. You have the power of the police being that corrupt. You have huge dangers for freedom in America.
Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, great to have you on the program this morning. Please come back.
Glad to be with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Two big